In this video, we'll learn the basic concepts surrounding running virtual machines in the cloud. And so traditionally, here's what we've done. Inside of our on-premises data center, we have a physical server called a hypervisor. And within that hypervisor, we have the ability to run multiple virtual machines. And think of these virtual machines as servers that are essentially independent of one another. I might have one virtual machine that runs a Linux operating system, and maybe it's a web server. I may have another virtual machine that runs Windows, and maybe that's a database server. And I might have other virtual machines doing all sorts of other things. And so I can run multiple virtual machines on a single physical server in my on-premises data center because of this hypervisor. And the big benefit of this approach is now I need less physical servers in my data center. Right? But the other big benefit of this approach is I can have more hypervisors within this same data center. And that'll give me the ability to do things like migrate VMs from one hypervisor to another. Or if one hypervisor fails, these VMs can restart on the other hypervisor and come back up. So that's what we've traditionally had, and they're also sometimes called hosts. Right? It might have hosts in a data center, and each of those hosts is running multiple virtual machines. Well, in the cloud, the exact same concepts exist. In a cloud, we've got a data center. For example, let's go back to AWS. AWS has multiple data centers in each availability zone, and there are many of these hosts, many of these hypervisors in each of those physical data centers. So if I want to, I can spin up a virtual machine on one of their physical hosts, on one of their hypervisors. And it's basically managed the same way I would manage these virtual machines in an on-premises data center. I'm in charge of maintaining and operating these virtual machines. So for example, I may have rules, firewall rules, governing hey, what traffic is allowed to hit this particular VM, and what traffic is allowed to hit this VM, and which ones are allowed to make outbound connections to the internet. I can control all of that. I also have to control the virtual machine itself. So this is a virtual machine that I am managing. And in the cloud, this is what we call an unmanaged service. And if you think back to our discussion on infrastructure as a service or platform as a service or software as a service, this is infrastructure as a service. AWS is going to handle all of the networking, all of the storage, all of the power, all of the cooling, all of the physical capacity, and they're going to handle all of those aspects of these physical hosts. So that's the infrastructure that they are providing. However, it's not software as a service. It's not platform as a service, because I actually am going to manage and maintain the operating system of each of these virtual servers. And that's a critical line to draw, because I may be counting on my cloud service provider to give me security. And they'll give me the tools I need to secure these workloads. For example, they'll give me firewall tools. And again, I can control exactly which traffic is allowed in and out of these virtual machines. I can control the route tables, which virtual machines are accessible from the internet and which ones are not. All of that is available to me. However, if I make mistakes, like for example, let's assume that this virtual machine shown here at the bottom right of my screen is a database VM. And so on this database VM, I have some kind of sensitive data, stuff that I don't want to make available on the internet. Well, if I configure this wrong, that's going to be my problem. And so what I want to consider with this database VM is I have to make sure that my operating system is patched. I have to make sure that I'm running antivirus on this virtual machine. I have to make sure that I'm not making it accessible on the internet, and that I've created the appropriate firewall rules to secure this VM. My cloud service provider isn't managing that for me. They're just giving me the infrastructure to run this virtual server on. And so this is often referred to as the shared responsibility model, where the cloud provider is responsible for giving me a secure environment within which to run this virtual machine. They're responsible for giving me tools like firewalls that I can use to control this traffic. That's their responsibility. They're responsible for retiring old hardware. Like, for example, if this database has data that's stored on some storage system, and eventually they retire that storage system, it's their job to wipe it out and make sure that none of that data can potentially be retrieved from that storage system. That's all their responsibility. The stuff here on the right, those are my responsibilities. And that's what we have when we have what we call an unmanaged service or infrastructure as a service. Is I have a lot of control on these virtual machines, but I also have the responsibility of making sure that they're configured properly and that they are appropriately secured. Now, another big benefit of running these workloads in the cloud is I have flexible pricing. So for example, right now I might need to run all 12 of these VMs, but tomorrow I may say, you know what, these 6 VMs are some application that I no longer require. I can simply shut these VMs down and stop paying for them at that time. So that really gives me that flexible pricing. And again, there's a balance there to keep in mind. What we're talking about here is what we call an on-demand pricing model. So with an on-demand pricing model, I have the ultimate flexibility. I can shut down workloads whenever I want, and I can stop paying for them right at that moment. However, that kind of on-demand flexibility comes with a price. Typically, these are going to be the most expensive options to purchase resources. Whereas if I'm willing to enter into a longer-term contract to say, hey, I'm going to run these 6 VMs for the next 3 years, or I'm going to run at least 6 VMs. It doesn't have to be the exact same VMs, but at least 6 VMs for 3 years, and I enter into a long-term contract, then I can save significant amounts of money here. So what we're talking about here is entering into a long-term agreement to purchase resources. And because we're willing to commit long-term, the cloud service provider is willing to give us a substantial break on the cost of those instances. And in addition to that, I have a lot of flexibility as to the type of virtual servers or instances that I can purchase. So for example, with AWS, they refer to their virtual servers as EC2 instances. And as you can see here, there is a vast array of different instance types that I can purchase, and they're all available at different price points. Some instances have more CPUs and memory than other instances. Some instances are geared towards certain types of operations. Like if I have workloads that require really fast CPUs, I can use a compute optimized instance. If I have workloads that are memory intensive, there's instances for that. Or there's instances for high performance computing with NVIDIA GPUs in them. So I have all these different instance types that I can choose from, and they're all going to have different costs associated with them. So depending on the instance type that I choose, the amount of money that I'm going to pay for those different instances is very different. And we can see a quick summary of that here. So I'm going to focus on compute optimized instances, and we can see, hey, some of these are as low as 3.4 cents an hour. Some of these are as expensive as $2.17 an hour. So depending on the amount of CPU and memory I want in my particular virtual server, the pricing is going to be adjusted accordingly. And so as you look at different cloud providers, like for example, Google Cloud, they have different names for this service, but the service is essentially the same. With the Google Cloud, I have Compute Engine. And again, I've got all these different machine types that I can choose from with Compute Engine. And there is a vast array of different types of machines that I can choose from. General purpose, compute optimized, memory optimized, accelerator optimized. So I can choose from these different types of instances. And again, they're all going to be at different price points, depending on the amount of resources I need. And here we see the Azure website And they're simply called virtual machines here. But you can see, again, we can choose from these different types of virtual machines as to what our needs are and what we want to actually deploy. And depending on the amount of virtual CPUs and the amount of memory that we want to actually allocate to these VMs and the type of disks, we're going to have different prices based on those resource allocations. And so as you look at these different cloud providers, you're going to find that although they have different names and different little nuances associated with them, basically the concepts are pretty much the same. We're going to have these different virtual machines, whether it's Azure with VMs or Google Cloud with the Compute Engine or AWS with EC2. We can run our virtual servers in the cloud, and we can choose from different pricing models, like, for example, on-demand pricing with AWS or pay-as-you-go with Azure. The concepts are the same across the three clouds, but the services all have different names. Let's take a moment to do a quick review of some of the key concepts that we learned in this lesson. So we learned what a hypervisor was. A hypervisor is essentially a physical server that many VMs can run on. They are also known as hosts. So I can have a host with a hypervisor installed and run many virtual machines on top of it. And in the cloud, I can create my own unmanaged virtual machines, which means that I'm in charge of the operating system. I'm in charge of securing those virtual machines. One of the benefits of virtual machines in the cloud is I have flexible pricing. I can stop my virtual machines when I want to stop paying for them. However, typically the cloud providers will give me a break on my hourly price if I enter into a contract for long-term purchases.